Great to be back in Alberta. I started my career actually in Edmonton, working for Health Canada as a health inspector, working on First Nation reserves in Alberta. That was a long time ago. I won't tell you when because that'll date me. But always great to be back here and really happy to be talking about the Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct and some of the work that we have been doing over the last little while. So I've got a bit of an agenda today to talk to you about the work. First, I want to talk to you about the code, what it is and why it's important. Then I'll give you a bit of an overview on the Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct, who we are and what we do, specifically how we actually exercise our mandate, how we deal with complaints and disputes as they come in and work with stakeholders. And then we'll chat a little bit about how you can stay informed and work with our office. So I'm going to jump right into the grocery code. How many people out here have heard of the Canada Grocery Code? Hands up. Oh, that's good. That's promising. When I started in March of last year, I would go to some of these events and I'd ask if they heard about the grocery code, and there's not a single hand that went up, so we're making some progress here. So the Canada Grocery Code, for those of you who may not be as familiar, is a voluntary industry code that was created when suppliers and retailers got a lot of pressure from government to come up with a code to really govern that relationship between suppliers and the retailers. And you heard from the previous presentation some of the concerns in this country about the concentration of power within the retail sector and the challenges that suppliers have in dealing with retailers and getting a fair deal in their commercial relationships. Well, the code is aimed at really addressing some of those imbalances, promoting things like trust and fairness in commercial dealings. It does not regulate prices, and it's not going to fix food inflation. And those are two of the big misconceptions when you hear about the code with the media. They talk about us fixing food inflation. Boy, wouldn't that be nice if we had a silver bullet like a grocery code to fix food inflation. We don't deal with that at all. The code is built on some guiding principles that are embedded within the code around transparency and certainty in dealings with retailers and suppliers, in fairness in those dealings, in those commercial relationships, in simplicity in those conversations, and ensuring timely dispute resolution. And those are the key principles within the code, and I can talk a little bit about how the office applies that in our daily work in a minute. It also deals with some specific trade rules. So within the code, if you haven't read the code, I encourage you to do so. It's not that long. It reads a little in part like a regulation in some of those parts. So it starts off with a set of principles and objectives. Then there's this part in the middle of the code that goes into the specifics, so the trade rules around delisting practices, around payments, around what should be in agreements, around fines and penalties and things like that. That's captured in the code. And then there's a section within the code around sort of its governance and the products that apply. So why does the code matter, and why should you care about the code? That's a question I get all the time. There's this voluntary code, and why does it matter? Other countries have pursued grocery codes of conduct, and we can learn a lot from their experience, and we hope to see similar results in Canada. So the UK has had a grocery code of conduct in place for over a decade now. They started as a voluntary code. It's now a regulated code, but the Canadian code is modeled very closely after the UK code. And something that they have found over their decade of experience is that the UK code has contributed to what they consider a more fair and competitive sector within the UK. It has lowered dispute resolution costs significantly because there are now rules in place and a structured approach to how you address concerns and disputes between suppliers and retailers. It's also improved business relationships, where it's not so much transactional as you might see here today. You know, I want to buy this much from you at this cost, and here's the deal that we're going to have, to being much more strategic conversations. How do we work together and invest together to grow your category and grow your business so we can both win? Now, in the UK, the reason they've seen these results, or the way they have seen these results, is they don't sort of dream up in the government, you know, here's how the code has been effective. They actually do a survey every year with suppliers in the UK, asking them how they feel the code is helping their business. And these are the things that the suppliers are telling the adjudicator in the UK, that they have seen improvements over the 10 years. They've seen their business relationships improving. They've seen the sorts of things that used to be problems around fines and penalties and delistings and other things. They've seen those things slowly start to go away. And so we're hoping in Canada that we're going to see similar results with our code. Very, very early days, because the code only came into place fully January 1st of this year. So very early days, a few months in, but we are hoping to see similar results in Canada as they have in other countries when it comes to how the code has been working in sort of addressing some of those issues. So I'll talk a little bit about the Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct and what it is that we do. So this is it. There are 2 3/4 of us in the Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct. It's myself as president and adjudicator of the office. I have one staff who deals with member services, communications, websites, and just about everything else. And then I have another person on contract 3/4 of the time that helps me with some of the policy work and some of the outreach and some of the consultations. We are responsible as a team for promoting awareness of the code, so coming out and doing stuff like this. We're responsible for supporting the application and the implementation of the code, so making sure that people have the tools and the knowledge and the education they need in order to implement the code and benefit from the code and its provisions. We're responsible for administering a dispute resolution management process, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. That's a formal complaints process that we are in charge of managing. We monitor what's going on in the industry, including the participation and the level of participation within the industry. It's very important for us to make sure that people are continuing to implement the code, and we continue to get more and more people signed up to our code. And we're responsible sort of for guiding the spirit of the code into daily practice, which sounds very flowery. But really, for us, it's looking to see where we need to step in to make sure that people are doing what they should under the code. And I'll talk about a couple of initiatives we've already done and some guidance that we're going to be releasing soon as part of that mandate to ensure that people are implementing the code in their daily practice. It's very important, especially when it comes to the Q&A portion of the section, to say what we don't do. So the office will not give an opinion or advise our members about case-specific issues on kind of a one-off basis. So at the end of my conversation with you all today, if the question I get at the end is, well, I tried to sell this thing to Loblaws and this is what they did, I'm not going to be able to advise you on that on the spot, because I wear another hat at the end of the day as an adjudicator, and I may have to actually make a formal decision on case-specific issues at that time, which is why I can't answer your case-specific issues. I am, though, very interested in hearing all about your case-specific issues, because I'm going to talk to you now about what it is that we actually do and how information from the sector is so important for us in doing that job. Oh, but before I do that, I have to talk about membership. So the code is only applicable to those companies that sign up to the office. So if you're not a member, and since I've only got 9 members in Alberta, I suspect many of you are not members of the office. In order for the code to apply to you and in order for you to get the benefits of the code, you have to sign up to the office. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to put up a slide that shows what it takes to be members. We've tried to make it as cost-effective as possible because we want people to join. So we've got about 200 members right now. That slide's a bit out of date. We get 5 or 6 every single week that come in. The important piece here is that all of the major retailers signed on and became members of the Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct by the end of the year last year. So Loblaws, Sobeys, Metro, Costco, Walmart, Save-On, FCL, all the big guys are now members of the Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct, which means they have all agreed to be bound by the provisions within the code. And that's very, very important because the code can't function as a voluntary code if we don't have membership. Equally, we have most of the large suppliers as members of the office. So if you think about companies like Unilever and Lactalis and Coke and Pepsi, and they've all joined the office. We're now really working to increase membership amongst the primary producer groups as well as the smaller to medium suppliers as people learn a little bit more about the value of the code and how it can help them in their businesses. So as I said, we are a membership-based organization, and the code only applies to those who are within the membership. So what is it that we actually do at the Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct? So our model is what we're calling an industry-informed model. So we've got this grocery code out there, and we've got a bunch of members in the office or who have joined the office. And what we do is really fundamentally driven by what we hear from the industry. And we're not sitting in our offices trying to dream up what might be your problems with your customers or the retailers. We depend on the industry to let us know what's going on. We rely on our members to tell us what the concerns are, what the issues are they're facing, whether they feel that there are practices or policies or behaviors that are going on that are not in compliance with the code. We do not proactively audit or investigate companies. We don't have any authority to do that, which means it's very important we hear what's going on. But we do act when issues are brought forward to us to try and address those issues, and I'll talk in a little bit more about what that action actually looks like. What the system is really designed to do is to lower the barrier to raising issues. So when I talk to groups such as yourselves or others around the country, one of the things I hear most frequently is that people don't want to go up against the big grocers or the big suppliers if you're an independent grocer. Because those are your customers. Your livelihoods depend on the relationship you have with those companies. And our office can play a very important role in being that sort of middle person in trying to address issues that arise so that individuals don't have to go up against those big companies. So you don't get the David and Goliath where you feel like you don't have the support to be able to address your issues, or that even if you raise the issue, nothing's going to happen anyway because you're just a smaller supplier trying to sell your products. So our office can really help, and I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. everything we do or all the information that we take in is completely confidential. We do not disclose the conversations we've had or where we get information. It's very important to us that we protect confidentiality because, again, we understand that one of the biggest barriers to even reaching out to our office is concern about retribution. If you're making complaints to us about a particular company and it gets back to them, what happens to you? In the UK, when they first brought their code of conduct in, I spoke to the first adjudicator in the UK, and she said for the first 2 years, nobody talked to them. She was just sitting in her office waiting for the phone to ring because people were concerned that they were going to talk to the adjudicator and somehow it was going to get back and there were going to be retribution. And so again, I can't stress enough that anything that people raise with the office, we keep completely confidential. Our approach, though, is very much a reactive approach. As I said, we don't go out auditing. We're not investigating on our own. We're not sitting in our offices kind of dreaming up what the issues might be. We are very reactive, so responding to the complaints that come in. There is some proactive work that we've started doing based on what we're hearing, and I'll talk a bit about a information gathering exercise we launched in March, the result of which is going to be some guidance we're going to issue probably in the next week or so. But mostly it's really us responding to what we hear from the industry, which is why, it is so important that we have people joining the office and talking to us. So specifically, we have two processes that we use to gather information and address issues that are raised with us. One is what we call the confidential complaints process. The other one is the dispute resolution management process. They sound very similar, but they're quite different in the approach and how we handle the issues. And I'll start by talking about the confidential complaints process that we have in place. Basically, this is where we gather intelligence from across the sector. So we have, if you're a member of the Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct, as a member, you have access to a complaints portal, where if you've got an issue that comes up, you feel that somebody is not abiding by the code, you're able to put all that information into a portal that comes directly to our office. It's not the only way we receive complaints. It is the most efficient for us. As I told you, we're 2 3/4 people, so efficiency is very important for the office. But we also we hear issues as we go out in conferences and I talk to people and at the breaks and people are raising what the issues are. We gather all that information in. As I go to every conference, at the end of the day, I go back to my hotel room and I write down about the issues that I'm hearing so that maybe I need to follow up, or maybe this is something where we're going to launch something a little more like an information gathering exercise that I'll talk to you about in a second. So we get information in. What we don't do is act as sort of a one-to-one mediator. So if somebody puts something through the portal and says, I'm having an issue with with one of the grocers, they fined me for something that wasn't in my agreement, office, I want you to fix it for me. We don't do that in the confidential complaints process. What we use this process for is to collect what we call systemic issues. So if I hear from one person, great, there's an issue coming in, I'm not going to run then to like Loblaw and say, hey, I got an issue that came through the portal, I need to talk to you because you've put in a fine here and I think that might be contrary to the code. Because if I did that, maybe you're the only one who's raised that issue. And so if I then go and run to the grocer and say, I've got this issue from the portal, they're going to know exactly who raised the concern. And as I said, confidentiality to us is very, very important. What we will do is start to look at, is this the first issue that we've heard about this practice with this retailer? Have I heard other issues? Maybe I get 3 or 4 complaints because it's a new policy that has just come out or a new practice that has just come out. This is where we start to get interested in the issue because it's a more systemic thing. It's likely affecting the whole industry. We may then decide to dig a little deeper. And so I might go to one of the industry trade associations and say, look, I've heard 3 or 4 complaints about this particular practice. Is this affecting all of your members? Could you give me a little more detail? So we try and get as much information as we can as an office to try and determine whether or not we think there might be an issue with the code at play. If we determine that there is a code issue, we're not going to at that stage say, you know, code violation, no code violation. But if we see that there is a code issue at play, my job, and this is probably going to be 90% of what I do, is I will call up the code representative in the company that is at question. And I should mention that, you know, when you join the code, you have to assign a code representative, so I know exactly who to talk to when I have a code issue that comes up. So if something comes up, I will pick up the phone, and if it's one of the big retailers, I'll call the code rep in that retailer and say, hey, you know, you've put out a new policy recently. I've gotten a lot of complaints about that policy. I've looked at that, and I've looked at the code. And I think you might want to have another look at that policy because there's a couple of sections of the code that I think might be an issue for you. So that would be our first approach. And this is really how we try to persuade people to address things within the code or violations of the code before they become big issues. So just being able to pick up the phone, let these companies know you might have an issue with the code, you might want to look into it. That's sort of our first step. There'll be follow-ups to see. And the experience in the UK, because this is exactly how they work in the UK, even if it's a legislated code, this is exactly how the adjudicator works in the UK as well. And in my recent call with the latest adjudicator, he was saying 80% of the time, the issue is fixed. When they talk to the code rep, they realize, oh yeah, you know, I read through that policy again, and you're right. You know, we've got something in this policy that we shouldn't. The code says it shouldn't be there. We're going to fix the policy. Case closed, all done. And that's where the office can really help the industry, is by surfacing these issues that are going on, talking to the companies and trying to persuade them to change their behavior or their practice or their policy. And if we can do that, we'll be very, very successful. So if the concern is addressed, that's the end of our work. We feel good about that. We've addressed the issue. If not, we still have some tools in our toolbox, even if this is a voluntary code. There's things we can do to continue to put a little bit of pressure for people to address issues. The office can issue guidance, which is sort of public information to say, if you're engaging in this kind of practice, you might want to rethink it because it may not be in full compliance with our grocery code. So this is sort of putting people on notice more publicly that the sorts of practices that we're seeing may not be compliant with the code. And this is important when I get to the next process, which is the disputes resolution management process. So we might publish guidance. We might publish best practices or other things to help inform and educate people about how they should go about certain aspects of the commercial dealings. If things are really egregious, and say I'm calling up this company and they don't want to talk to me and they say, oh, you know, Karen, you're just wrong and we're not going to change anything with the code, and I keep getting complaints about the code, you know, my big tool and the big stick that we have is the naming and shaming. So my office is completely independent in our ability to issue public reports. I can put anything I want in those public reports, and even my board of directors doesn't get a say in what's in those public reports. And so if I'm having an ongoing issue where there's a compliance issue and companies are not in good faith abiding by the code, I can publicly name those companies. Now that may not sound like a great big stick, but I can tell you when I talk to the CEOs and the senior executives of these very large companies, public naming and shaming is of great concern to them. Many of them would much rather pay a fine than see their name associated with a code violation. Some of you may have seen a couple of years ago, the House of Commons, they were very concerned about some of the behaviors in the grocery sector, and they hauled in a bunch of CEOs to appear before parliamentary committees. They don't like that, and they know that the government is watching what's going on at the grocery code. We're working very closely with government. We consult with them regularly. I've appeared already a couple of times in front of the Ag Committee who are tracking progress. So again, it doesn't sound like a big stick, but I can tell you nobody wants to see their name in print. And so there's things that the office can do to really try and persuade folks to abide by the code and live up to what they have committed to do under the code. Now, if all else fails, we have another process. And this is the dispute resolution management process. So the first process was more trying to identify systemic issues that were going on, completely confidential process. We will never disclose the information that we receive in. We're actually, in about a month, we're updating our website portal for that process where you can send in completely anonymous information to us. It might tie our hands a bit if we need to follow up and get any additional information. But completely confidential, again, never to be disclosed. The dispute resolution management process is a bit different. This is where a company who cannot get resolution through either the confidential complaints process or through trying to work things out themselves with the company really wants to bring something forward for adjudication. They would come to our office. We would do a bit of an assessment to see whether they had tried to work things out, whether this was a code-related issue. If it is, this is where they would make a formal complaint to our office about a code violation. We would then notify the other party. So between the parties, this is no longer confidential. So it is a bit of the grenade over the wall if you're talking about one of your big customers, because you're coming to the office with a formal complaint, and they are aware of that. It's confidential to the rest of the public. We won't publish names. Oh, we've got a dispute and it's between this party and that party. We don't publish that. But it will be known between yourself and the other party. The office then offers mediation services. So trying to get the parties to work things out themselves. We offer this free of charge with the hopes that at the end of the mediation, parties have come to an agreement and I don't need to be involved. If parties refuse mediation or can't address their issue through mediation, then it comes to me. And that's where I put on my adjudicator hat. And I will hold a hearing of sorts, and I will determine whether or not there was actual code breach at play. My decision is not appealable. There's not a Supreme Court of the office. My decision is final. And if I find that there has been a breach of the code, the office will issue a public notice of noncompliance, which will name the party in breach of the code, as well as how the code was breached, but not the party that made the complaint. Because again, we're still trying to help keep confidentiality as much as possible. The party who has had the notice of compliance then has to come back to the office with an action plan as to how they're going to address that issue. So whether it's a fine that shouldn't have been levied and then they're going to pay back the money, whatever is in that action plan, they need to report it back to the office. I don't expect that a lot of people are going to use the formal dispute resolution management process. In the UK, they have a very similar process. Their adjudicator can actually award damages I can't do that. Their adjudicator can award damages, and they maybe get 2 of them a year. Again, because this is the grenade over the wall. It's generally in the UK, their experience has been the relationship is completely broken down. Somebody just wants something out of it, and they're likely never going to do business again with that person, and they just want some resolution. But we have it. It's important, and it's another tool in our toolbox to ensure that people continue to play by the rules. I spoke to you earlier about this information gathering. So I wanted to give you a bit of an example of what we do when we get complaints, other than me just picking up the phone and calling people. We're not just sitting around waiting for complaints to come in. We do, as I said, as I go to conferences, as I go to events, I hear about stuff going on, and sometimes, as in the case of this information gathering exercise, we decided as an office to be a little proactive and get a little more information, so we weren't just sitting around waiting for the phone to ring. So in March, having heard from a number of our members about concerns around 2 practices related to agreements, we decided to go and collect information from our members and pull that information out of people versus waiting for them to give it to us. And so we launched an anonymous survey of our members asking for more information into 2 practices. One was the issue of click to accept. I don't know if any of you do business with the big retailers where they say, here are our terms and conditions, click to accept, or you don't do business with us. That is a practice we know that had been going on. We had received some complaints, both through our portal as well as through just conversations. It is concerning because the code itself says that your agreement with your customers should be a negotiated agreement. So a click to accept sort of negates that negotiation where you're not able to actually sit down with another individual and have a conversation. The end result may be the same, especially if you're dealing with one of these big companies. They may still say, these are our terms and conditions, accept them or not, but you should be able to have a conversation. And so we gathered some information about these practices to understand sort of how prevalent they were and what the issues were and how concerning they were. Another practice at the same time that we were looking into is in agreements where they have clauses that allow for unilateral changes of those agreements. So this is common practice, my understanding, in a lot of agreements where they say, here's the agreement, and we can change it anytime we want. So we had some concern about that as well, because that doesn't seem to be sort of in line with some of the aspects of the code. The code allows that if you've agreed in your agreement to have these clauses that allow for unilateral changes, they can make unilateral changes. The concerns we had was how much notice do people get when there's going to be a unilateral change? Are you even able to see what the changes are, or do you just get another 70-page agreement where you've got to go line by line to see where those changes were? So again, we gathered information on that. Our information gathering exercise closed at the end of March, and we will be issuing guidance likely next week. The guidance is written, it's just going to translation, and we're going to issue it next week to tell people, one, if you're using these click to accept on your terms and conditions, there are things you need to consider and other things that you will need to put in place if you want to be compliant with the code. The other guidance talks about the use of clauses that allow for unilateral changes and what you need to do if you're going to exercise those. So around giving people notice and ensuring that those changes are transparent. So those are just a couple of things that we looked into. We are likely, as we get more information and more issues arise, we are likely to do these sorts of information gathering exercises on a quarterly basis. I've already heard a lot of concern about fill rates and fines related to fill rates. That might be the next area that we decide to explore. So we don't wait entirely just to get complaints in and then act, but we do act on the intelligence that we hear. So if I'm getting the complaints about a certain aspect, we may decide to do an information gathering exercise just to also give all of you cover so that I'm not just hearing it from one or two people. In the case of our information gathering exercise, we heard from 64 people once we put out our request for information. And so now I can go with some confidence back into the industry and say, look, we got 64 submissions on this, all saying the same thing. There's clearly an issue here. Just quickly, I'm just looking at the time here. Our office, as I said, we collect lots of information, we collect complaints. We don't want to be a black hole where you sign up to us, you put a complaint in through our portal, and you never hear from us again, and you don't know what we've done. We are creating a reporting cycle. Our first report is likely going to go out at the end of May, early June. We're going to let people know in that report the kinds of complaints we've heard, the sorts of things we've done with complaints, the issues that are arising that we believe we need to deal with. Our second report is going to go out in September. It's also an interim report where, again, we're going to talk about what we've been hearing. We're also going to talk in those reports what's working well, what's not. We're going to be very transparent about that. And then we have an annual report that we have to issue. That's part of our operating rules and our bylaws. This will be a more formal report, a full analysis of the year's complaints and issues that have arisen, how we've dealt with them. We're going to do an industry survey as well in September to get from industry how you all are feeling about the code, how it's working for you, how it's not working for you, because it's important for us to understand that as well. So we want to be as transparent as we can in order to make sure that people know what we're up to and that we're actually dealing with the issues. But to stay informed with our office, we put out a newsletter every month. You don't have to be a member of the office to subscribe to that newsletter. There's no fluff in that newsletter. It really is all about what we're up to. If we release new guidance, it comes through that newsletter. If we're going to undertake an information gathering exercise, you're going to see it in that newsletter. If you want to know what's going on with the office, subscribing to that newsletter is really, really important. As I said, it comes up every month. We don't have a hard and fast date for it. We play a little fast and loose with our timing given our limited resources. Oh, I'm going to... but I suggest if you're not subscribed, you should. We also have a LinkedIn account. It's the only social media we use. Again, we just keep that to inform people of what the office is up to, where we are, what we're doing, the sorts of things that we release. Very important to be part of that if you want to know what we're up to. Finally, we've got a great resource in our website. All of our guidance materials are posted on that site, as well as information about the code. We have a members directory, so you can go in there and see if the person that you're dealing with is actually a member of the office. If you become a member, we've got resources on the member side of our website, including who the code representative is in every single company. So if you're dealing with an issue, you actually know who to talk to in some of these big companies that have thousands of employees. And finally, becoming a member, as I said, the code only applies to you if you're actually a member of the office. And we tried to keep our membership dues reasonable so that cost is not a barrier to joining the office. It's really important for people to join if you believe in the code. Number one, the code can't help you if you're not a member of the office. It provides clear rules for your dealings with industry. We're a bit like the CAA, that if you're having an issue today and you're not a member, you can't call us up because we're not going to come and help you when you're stuck at the side of the road. You have to have been a member when the issue arises. So again, I encourage you to do that. It really will help you in informing the office. We listen most to our members. That doesn't mean that when I'm here for the rest of the day, if you've got issues, I'm not going to listen to you if you're not a member, but it really helps to keep the office informed. Here we go. So membership, very, very important in the office. Finally, my last slide here. Our first 2 years of funding actually came from the government. They felt so strongly about the code that they wanted this to be successful, and they funded us through last year and partially through this year. I am happy to say that even with the membership that we have today, we are fully industry funded going into 2027, so we're not going anywhere anytime soon. But under the agreement I have with the federal and provincial governments, I do have to acknowledge the funding that they've provided to the office, because without that, we would not exist today. So I'm happy to take any questions and really appreciate the time you've given me today. Thank you. Oh, I see a question over here. So the code itself aims to create fairness in that grocery sector by putting in place provisions that address the most egregious of behaviors that were pointed out. So, delays in payments. The code speaks to the fact that you must abide by your payment terms in addressing payments. The code deals with delisting, for instance, another big issue, where the code says you must give reasonable notice if you're going to make a delisting decision. Now, it uses very high-level language like reasonable, but that's great, because who gets to decide what's reasonable? I do. And so what's reasonable to one company may not be reasonable to the other, and I get to hear sort of the issues. So for example, if you're talking about a fruit and vegetable, a seasonal product where it was ordered, reasonable delisting of that product may be a whole growing season. Whereas if it's just a single item on the shelf that can be easily sold somewhere else, maybe reasonable delisting is 30, 60 days. So there's a number of provisions within the code itself that speak to those behaviors that were concerning, that aims to create a more fair environment. So was this a really bad career move for me, or was this? No, I think it's going to be long term. Even in the UK, it's been a decade. I think the real question is, will a voluntary system work, or will Canada end up going down the path of a regulated system? And I think, we've got a code now, and the government is very interested in what's going on. They are ready to jump in if they're going to get a red flag from us saying, like, this doesn't work. And we're going to be very honest about that. If we really feel a voluntary code isn't working, we're going to report about that. The industry is going to talk about that as well. But I think this code is here to stay. We saw Australia. I didn't talk about Australia either. They started voluntary. They're now regulated, and for different reasons. I think we're set up very well here in Canada, but I think the code is here. It's here to stay.